Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's start today's episode. Balraj Ratu. 19-year-old Balraj Ratu lived with his family in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. On November 6, 1995, he asked his father if he could use the family car to meet some friends. Around 7 p.m., Balraj was seen sitting in the car, drinking beer with a friend near the intersection of 138th Street and 72nd Avenue in Surrey. This was the last time anyone saw him. When he didn't return home that night, his family reported him missing to the police. 2 days later, at around 1 a.m., a strange phone call was made to the Ratu home. The voice on the other end was a young woman who seemed to think she was speaking to Balraj. She simply said, "Raj, you were beaten up," before laughing and hanging up. The following day, another mysterious call was received around the same time, but this time the voice was believed to be that of an older woman. She told the family that their son was no longer alive. In both cases, the callers were said to speak both Punjabi and English, and police determined they were two different women, though their identities remained unknown. At the time, the technology available to trace such calls was not advanced enough to track them down. A few days after the mysterious phone calls, Balraj's car was found abandoned and burned out on a remote road near Chilliwack, British Columbia. Inside the car, authorities discovered bloody clothes, but there was no sign of Balraj. Upon a thorough search, police only found his fingerprints inside the vehicle, suggesting that the assailant had intentionally wiped down the door handles to remove their own prints. Balraj's friends were questioned, but none of them had seen or met up with him that day. Family members stated that Balraj had no known enemies and was not involved in gangs or drugs. Authorities believe foul play was involved and suspect that the unidentified callers may be connected to his disappearance. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Balraj Ratu's disappearance remain a mystery, and the identity of the mysterious callers is still unknown. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Jenny Lynn. Jenny Lynn, a bright and gifted 14-year-old, excelled both academically and musically, playing the piano and viola while maintaining straight A's. She was the only child of John and May Leanne Lynn, both professionals, and lived in Castro Valley, California. On May 27, 1994, Jenny arrived home from school and spoke on the phone with a friend until around 5:15 p.m. This was a common routine for her, as she was well-liked and had many friends, often spending her free time talking on the phone, doing homework, or practicing music. Sometime after ending the call, Jenny was attacked in the second-floor bathroom of her home, where she was bound with duct tape and fatally stabbed. She had also been forced to undress. Her father discovered her lifeless body when he returned from work around 6:45 p.m., immediately alerting the authorities. When police searched the home with the family's assistance, they found no signs of burglary, suggesting the crime was not motivated by theft. Detectives suspect that the perpetrator entered the home through either a broken window or the sliding glass door. There is also speculation that the attacker may have intended to sexually assault Jenny but was interrupted for some reason. Bloodhounds were brought to the crime scene, and they managed to trace a scent leading through a field behind the Lynn family's home, suggesting a possible escape route for the killer. However, the case took an even more puzzling turn when Jenny's father, John Lynn, came forward with a potential lead. John recounted an unsettling encounter that occurred on or around May 12, 1994, between 6 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. at the Bay Fair BART station in San Leandro, California. A man approached him and stated, "I have a proposition for you. I got your daughter." John provided authorities with a description of the individual, leading to the creation of a composite sketch. The man was described as being between 30 and 45 years old at the time, standing between 5 feet 8 inches and 6 feet 0 inches with a thin, gaunt appearance. Despite this, investigators do not currently consider him a person of interest in Jenny's case. For over a decade, John and Jenny Lynn waited for answers and for justice so that they could finally begin to heal and overcome the tragedy that hit their family. Then in February 2006, police named their prime suspect as Sebastian Alexander Shaw, a Vietnamese man born in 1967. Sebastian was arrested in August of 1994, where he was found with a stolen car and 2 rifles taken from San Ramon just 3 days after Jenny's cold-blooded murder. Sebastian was also in possession of a quote murder kit including surgical gloves, a ski mask, duct tape, knives, binoculars, and plastic wrist ties like those used by police. The man already has a long criminal history, as he had already 3 murder convictions and claimed to have killed 10 to 12 people. While the lead in Jenny's case appears promising, there is not enough evidence to conclusively link Sebastian to the crime or secure a conviction. Authorities have not publicly disclosed what initially led them to consider him a suspect. Earlier in the investigation, the FBI theorized that the perpetrator was likely someone local who was familiar with Jenny and her daily routine. For a time, online sleuths speculated that serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells might have been responsible, but this theory has long been dismissed. Following the heartbreaking loss of their daughter, Jenny's parents established the Jenny Lynn Foundation to honor her memory through community initiatives. The organization hosts various events in the East Bay Area, including a youth music camp, scholarships for aspiring musicians, and safety awareness programs. Despite their ongoing efforts to keep Jenny's case in the public eye, her murder remains unsolved to this day. Moving on to the next case. Jersey Bridgeman. A mother from a small town tucked her daughters into bed, but when she went to wake them the following morning, one of the girls was missing. The police quickly sprang into action and began uncovering a series of strange and unsettling clues. It wasn't long before detectives started piecing together the chilling truth of what had happened to the girl, and the revelation was far more shocking than anyone had anticipated. Jersey Bridgeman was born on November 14, 2006, in the quiet town of Bentonville, Arkansas. When Jersey was 3 years old, her parents had another daughter, but shortly after, they decided to divorce. Despite the separation, Jersey continued to spend a lot of time with her father. He remarried and had 2 more daughters with his new wife. Living just a short drive away in a neighboring town, Jersey would often visit them for a few days before returning to her mother. In 2012, when Jersey was 5, she and her mother relocated to a new house within the same town. Jersey and her sister quickly bonded with the local kids, and her mother's best friend lived only a few yards away. The families were so close-knit that they felt like one big extended family, spending a lot of time together. On November 19, 2012, just days after Jersey's birthday, her mom went to work her regular evening shift at the local supermarket. On nights when her parents couldn't watch the girls, Jersey's mom would sometimes leave them with her best friend, who didn't mind taking care of them, especially since her own children were friends with Jersey and her sister. After finishing her shift around 11:30 p.m., Jersey's mom picked up the girls and took them home to bed. Jersey quickly fell asleep, but her younger sister wanted to sleep with their mom, so she went into her room. The following morning, Jersey's mom woke up around 6:30 a.m. to get Jersey ready for school, but when she checked her daughter's bedroom, Jersey was nowhere to be found. The woman began frantically searching the entire house, quickly realizing that Jersey had vanished. In a panic, Jersey's mom called her own mother, telling her that Jersey was missing. Her mom suggested that maybe Jersey was hiding somewhere and advised her to check closets and other places she might fit. Jersey's mom searched every corner of the house again, but there was still no sign of her. When she looked outside, she saw her friend sitting on the front porch. Thinking that maybe Jersey had woken up early and gone over to her house to play, she asked if she had seen her. Since Jersey spent a lot of time there, it seemed plausible. However, her friend hadn't seen Jersey and immediately joined in the search. They checked around the neighborhood, and her friend even looked inside her own house, but there was still no trace of Jersey. At this point, Jersey's mom was in full-blown panic and decided to call the police right away. Officers arrived quickly and began their search. The officers thoroughly searched the house to ensure Jersey wasn't inside, then got permission from her friend to inspect her house as well. Meanwhile, other officers began searching the nearby streets in case Jersey had wandered off. During the search, they noticed a small vacant house next to Jersey's mother's property. Seeing that one of the doors was slightly ajar, they decided to investigate. After confirming that the house was unoccupied, they quickly requested a search warrant. Investigators entertained the possibility that Jersey might have entered the house, and a judge swiftly granted them permission to search the property. The officers combed through each room but found no sign of Jersey, until one of them decided to check a closet in the bedroom. What he discovered was horrifying. Inside, they found Jersey's lifeless body, and it was immediately clear that she was no longer alive. Her clothes were missing, and based on what they could see, it appeared she had been strangled. The body was handed over to medical examiners, and the police began their investigation. When they spoke with Jersey's mom, she mentioned that she left one of the front doors unlocked that night. She explained that she often did this because her boyfriend also worked night shifts and sometimes came by afterward to stay at her place. Since he didn't have a key, leaving the door unlocked meant he wouldn't have to wake her up. She added that he hadn't come over that night, and police immediately began considering him as a potential suspect. Since someone had taken Jersey to the abandoned house, it was likely she knew and trusted this person. Her mom's boyfriend got along well with Jersey and her younger sister. Whenever he was around, he spent a lot of time playing with the girls, and they both trusted him. While investigators looked into his whereabouts that night, they uncovered something else. About a year earlier, Jersey's biological father had faced some serious charges. In December 2011, Jersey was spending time at her father's house with his new wife. During her stay, a friend of the family was visiting, and one day, this person heard a child crying from behind a closed door. Curious and concerned, she opened the bedroom door to check what was going on. What she saw was truly shocking. Jersey was sitting there with a dog collar around her leg, tied to a dresser. The room was a mess, cluttered with dirty clothes and other stuff. Horrified, she freed Jersey and immediately reported what she'd seen to the police. Officers quickly arrested Jersey's father and his wife. During questioning, they claimed they'd been tying Jersey up at night for her own safety, saying she'd sometimes sleepwalk and tried to grab some medications or even leave the house in the middle of the night. When asked why they didn't just use child gates, Jersey's father simply replied that they couldn't afford them. However, as the investigation continued, police found out that her father had been using drugs and somehow had enough money to buy them. He also wasn't working, despite the fact that he and his wife were raising 2 other children. Investigators spoke with Jersey, and she revealed the real reason they'd started tying her to the dresser. One night, she had gone into the kitchen and taken a few pieces of pie and some other snacks without permission. To punish the girl, her father and stepmother decided to tie her up. Jersey also told that sometimes she was forced to sleep on the floor in the bedroom without even being allowed to use the bathroom. In the end, Jersey's father was sentenced to 18 years, and his wife received 12 years behind bars. Since then, Jersey had been living with her mother, who had no idea about all of this, as Jersey had been too afraid to tell anyone. This story, for obvious reasons, caught the detectives' attention, but they quickly established that Jersey's father couldn't have been involved, as he had been in prison since his arrest and would not have been able to be at his daughter's home that night. Investigators then turned their attention to all known sex offenders living within a few miles. Each one provided an alibi, leading the police to focus on people in Jersey's close circle. Around this time, the medical examiners completed a preliminary report confirming that the cause of death was strangulation. They also found evidence S.A. and collected a biological material from the perpetrator. This sample was sent to the lab for DNA analysis, while detectives turned their attention to Jersey's mother's boyfriend. He claimed that he'd been working at a store that night, and his shift didn't end until early in the morning. Police reviewed the store's CCTV footage, which backed up his claim. However, there was one problem. Detectives found that he had a break during his shift. Theoretically, he could have committed the crime, as the store was only a few minutes away from Jersey's home. But his co-workers told the police that he hadn't left the store during his break, so detectives eventually ruled him out as a suspect. While speaking with the police, the boyfriend mentioned an interesting detail. Around 3 a.m., a man named Zachary, Jersey's mother's neighbor and the husband of her best friend, had come into the store. Zachary said he had stomach pains, bought some medicine, and left. Given that the crime seemed to have been committed around this time, police found this account quite suspicious. They had already spoken to Zachary and his wife and had searched their home, but didn't find any evidence. Initially, Zachary hadn't raised any suspicions, but with this new information about his late-night trip, detectives decided to question him again. Zachary confirmed that he did wake up in the middle of the night with stomach pain. Not finding any medication at home, he headed to a store just a few hundred yards away. When he got back, he eventually fell asleep again and woke up around 6:30 a.m. to get his older son ready for school. He also willingly provided police with his fingerprints, a DNA sample, and the clothes he wore to the store that night. Zachary insisted he would never harm Jersey, and the detectives believed he was telling the truth. While awaiting the DNA test results, the police decided to dig deeper into Zachary's background and uncovered a few intriguing details. First, they found that he had an extensive criminal record, though it was mainly for non-violent, relatively minor offenses. Zachary also had a troubled past. Police learned that he had suffered various forms of abuse over the years from his family members, including his stepfather, biological mother, and brother. 13 reports had been filed by concerned people who noticed the abuse and wanted to help, but it's unclear if the police ever took action. Detectives then spoke with Jersey's mother to learn more about Zachary. She shared that he and his wife often helped look after the kids, and he got along great with them. Jersey and her sister even called him Uncle Zach. He was practically family. The girls visited his house. Mother also mentioned that both Zachary and his wife had keys to her home. Since Jersey seemed to trust Zachary completely, and would have followed him anywhere without question, detectives began to consider he might be involved. They also grew suspicious of his late-night store visit, thinking it could have been a calculated move to create an alibi with witnesses and CCTV footage. When detectives brought Zachary in for another interview, he suddenly said he wouldn't talk without his lawyer. This shift caught investigators off guard, especially since he'd been fully cooperative just recently, doing everything they'd asked. With no solid evidence against Zachary, all the investigators could do was wait for the DNA test results and keep searching for new leads. But then, out of nowhere came an unexpected twist. Despite his initial refusal, Zachary called the police, saying he was now willing to take a polygraph test to clear his name. Detectives immediately set everything up, but the results weren't in Zachary's favor. The polygraph operator determined that many of his responses showed signs of deception. This only deepened detectives' suspicions, but they still needed concrete evidence. They also discovered that Zachary's decision to take the polygraph test was prompted by his wife, who had apparently started to doubt his honesty. It turned out she warned him that if he refused to cooperate with the police, she would take the children and leave him. So, this sudden change wasn't really about Zachary trying to clear his name after all. Soon after failing the polygraph, Zachary took another suspicious step. He posted on social media saying he had made a huge mistake that would ruin his life. To detectives, this seemed like further confirmation of his guilt, yet they still needed some solid proof to move forward. The lab results came back on November 26, 6 days after the murder. This was also the day of Jersey's funeral, and Zachary, along with his wife, planned to attend it. Forensic experts had extracted a DNA profile from the biological material found on the victim's body and analyzed all of Zachary's clothing. The results didn't surprise detectives. Nearly all of Zachary's clothes contained traces of Jersey's DNA, and the biological material on her body matched his DNA as well. With this crucial evidence, detectives obtained a warrant for his arrest and detained him right outside the church, just as the ceremony was about to begin. During the interrogation, Zachary continued to deny his involvement, saying he had nothing to do with it. But when detectives told him about the lab results, he ultimately confessed to the crime. According to his story, Zachary really did wake up with a stomachache that night and went looking for medicine, but couldn't find any at home. So, he decided to drop by Jersey's mom's place. For him and his wife, this wasn't unusual. They would often stop by to borrow medicine from her cabinet. Besides, Zachary knew she usually left one of the doors unlocked so he wouldn't even need to wake her up. Once inside, he noticed that Jersey's bedroom door was slightly open and decided to go in. According to Zachary, he had no clear motive and insisted he didn't understand why he went in there. He woke Jersey up and asked her to come with him. Trusting him like family, Jersey didn't hesitate and followed. Zachary led her to an abandoned house nearby, where he committed his monstrous crime and left her body in a closet. Afterward, he walked to a store, bought some stomach medicine and went home, where he was able to fall asleep without a care. The next morning, he joined the search for Jersey as if nothing had happened, pretending he was just worried and eager to help find her. Zachary also claimed he hadn't planned the crime and said it all happened on impulse, though detectives had doubts about that. Still, they had no reason to question the rest of his confession. He provided many highly accurate details that hadn't been made public. At that point, the police had kept almost all information under wraps, even from Jersey's mother, so there was no way Zachary could have known those specifics otherwise. In the end, he was charged with murder and held in jail awaiting trial. The prosecution announced they would seek the death penalty. As for his attorney, he didn't even try to argue Zachary's innocence. Given the confession and overwhelming evidence, it seemed like a lost cause. Instead, his focus was on getting a life sentence instead of the death penalty. It's worth mentioning that soon after Zachary was put in jail, another inmate attacked him. He wasn't seriously injured though, and since then, he's been under increased protection. The trial began in the spring of 2015, 2.5 years after the murder. Since Zachary never recanted his confession, the proceedings moved very quickly. He was found guilty and sentenced to death, with 2 additional life sentences and an extra 20 years. Before the sentencing, Zachary spoke to Jersey's family, expressing deep regret for what he'd done and hoping they might one day forgive him. However, his apology didn't seem to have much effect on them. As is often happens, executions are almost always delayed for many years, and Zachary's case was no exception. He made several attempts to appeal his sentence, initially claiming that his first lawyer hadn't even tried to exclude certain pieces of evidence, and that the jury selection process had been flawed. His new attorney also argued that Zachary suffered from severe mental health issues and developmental delays. They claimed his mental capacity was equivalent to that of an 8-year-old, meaning he shouldn't be held fully responsible for his actions. Interestingly, even Zachary's own mother, who had mistreated him for years, came forward in his defense. In an interview, Jersey's mother expressed that she still loved her son and hoped that his lawyers would be able to overturn his sentence. Zachary's wife, who was also Jersey's mother's best friend, supported his appeal as well, despite having previously condemned his actions. However, despite these efforts, the appeal was denied. Independent experts concluded that although Zachary faced developmental challenges, he was fully capable of understanding his actions and was aware that he was committing a serious crime. Zachary remains in prison, still pursuing efforts to appeal his sentence. The most recent developments in his case occurred in early 2024, but his lawyers have yet to convince the court to overturn the death penalty, and it seems unlikely that the situation will change. As for Jersey's mother, she eventually married the man she was dating at the time of the tragedy, and they had a daughter together. She regrets that this little girl will never get to know Jersey or experience the kind of wonderful older sister she could have been. Moving on to the next case. Joel and Lisa Guy. Saturday, November 26, 2016, began like any other for Joel and Lisa Guy. The couple, who had been together for 31 years, lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and were in the process of selling their property on Golden View Lane, with plans to retire in Sneedville. Joel, 61, worked as a pipeline engineering designer, while Lisa, 55, worked in human resources at Jacobs Engineering in Oak Ridge. Lisa had spent much of her life as a homemaker, but according to one of Joel's daughters, Lisa only worked to give her paycheck to her son, Joel Jr. Born in 1988, Joel Jr. was 28 years old at the time. He graduated from the Louisiana School for Math, Science, and Arts in 2006, after attending Hanville High School. Over the years, Joel Jr. attended one semester at George Washington University before enrolling at Louisiana State University. Despite his education, Joel Jr. had never held a job and was financially supported by his parents. In 2016, Joel Jr. was living in Baton Rouge, apparently pursuing a career as a plastic surgeon. However, as his parents, Lisa and Joel Sr., decided to retire, they also planned to stop financially supporting him. They had informed his siblings that it was time for Joel Jr. to become independent. The prosecution would later argue that this withdrawal of support was the catalyst for his decision to kill his parents. On Saturday, November 26, 2016, Lisa went out to Walmart to do some shopping. CCTV footage from the store showed her purchasing food around 12:15 p.m. While she shopped, unaware of the horror unfolding back at home, Joel Jr. began executing his plan. He attacked his father, Joel Sr., in the exercise room on the first floor of the house. The attack was brutal. Joel Sr. was stabbed at least 40 times, with severe damage to his liver, kidneys, lungs, and ribs. After the stabbing, Joel Jr. cut his father's clothing and placed it near the crime scene. The exercise room displayed clear signs of a violent struggle, with torn blinds and a tipped-over Bowflex machine. Blood spattered across one of the walls, evidence of the brutal assault. When Lisa returned from Walmart, she set down her shopping bags at the front door and climbed the stairs to the first floor. There, she too was violently attacked, stabbed at least 31 times. 9 of her ribs were severed. Afterward, as with her husband, her clothing was removed and left beside where she was killed. In the aftermath of the murders, Joel Jr. took his father's hands, severing them at the wrists, and left them on the floor of the exercise room. He then proceeded to decapitate his mother, placing her head in a pot and setting it on the stove to boil. A forensic examiner would later testify that Lisa's head had not been cleanly removed but had been violently torn off with force. But Joel Jr.'s actions didn't stop there. He dismembered both of his parents entirely and placed their remains in a bin filled with chemicals, hoping to accelerate decomposition and dissolve the bodies completely. Each body was later found to have had a large gash inflicted upon it after death so the chemicals in the bin would seep into the body's main cavities more quickly. As a result of the violence, the 28-year-old had sustained wounds to both his hands, including several deep cuts. At 3:30 p.m. that day, Joel Jr. can be seen on CCTV in Walmart gathering bandages and ointments so that he could attempt to look after the wounds. However, the following day, he drove back to Baton Rouge to have the cuts treated at the student clinic. After this, he did not return to the scene of the crime. It wasn't long, however, before those close to the older couple became suspicious. Lisa's boss became concerned when she repeatedly tried to call the 55-year-old but got no answer, and she never turned up to work when she was scheduled to. Subsequently, Lisa's employer alerted the authorities and asked them to perform a welfare check. Knox County police officers arrived on the scene and noticed immediately that it seemed to be empty. Strangely, although the house was for sale, there was no real estate lockbox on the front door handle. It was later determined that the doorknob had been switched with the one from the back door. Peering inside, investigators saw perishable groceries, which is spelled out of shopping bags. Packets of bacon and tubs of ice cream lay on the ground floor of the home just inside the door. Most tellingly of all, however, was the odd chemical smell emanating from the house. They were able to access one of the cars in the driveway and open the garage door to get inside, where they were immediately met with an even stronger version of the chemical smell and also a blazing heat. The home's thermostat was turned up and several small heaters were plugged in, making the building a blazing 33 degrees Celsius inside. On the table, authorities found the wallets of Joel Sr. and Lisa. A sledgehammer sat on top of them. The pot containing Lisa's head was still boiling away on the stove, although it was not yet investigated and officers were unaware of what the pot contained at the time. Upstairs, Joel Sr.'s hands were found. Then the bodies in solution were discovered in the bathroom. Alongside this find, investigators noticed a bag of baking soda, muriatic acid, drain opener, and bottles of bleach in the home. One officer described the crime scene as, quote, "the most horrific thing I've ever encountered in law enforcement in my life." In the guest bedroom, authorities uncovered the most incriminating piece of evidence of all. Inside a backpack, they recovered a notebook filled with the details of Joel Jr.'s plan to kill his parents. One of his notes read, quote, "Money all mine. I get the whole thing." He was to receive $500,000 in life insurance policies if both his parents died or went missing. The 28-year-old had originally planned to stab his parents to death, dismember and dissolve their remains, clean and burn down their house, and then frame his father for the entire thing. Joel Jr. was also caught on CCTV buying the supplies he needed for the crime, and this showed that he was stocking up on the items he would need as early as November 7th. Joel Jr.'s behavior before the murders was meticulously planned, as he used cash in each transaction to avoid being tracked, often opting for self-checkout. His purchases included muriatic acid, food-grade hydrogen peroxide, a bleach sprayer, multiple extension cords, a timer, and a large plastic blue bin, items all critical for his horrific crime. Surveillance footage from stores like Home Depot and Walmart placed him at these locations just days before the killings, showing his preparation for the dismemberment and attempted disposal of his parents' bodies. Once the authorities discovered the gruesome evidence and reviewed the surveillance footage, a joint task force from the FBI, Knox County Sheriff's Office, and East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office was formed to place Joel Jr. under surveillance. On November 29th, he was apprehended in the parking lot of his apartment complex, where officers found disturbing items in his car, including a meat grinder and a jerry can. Despite pleading not guilty, Joel Jr. filed a motion to receive the death penalty should he be convicted. His defense team presented no evidence during his 4-day trial. In October 2020, the jury found him guilty of both murders, and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The trial marked the end of a disturbing chapter, but the pain and shock of his actions continued to haunt the surviving family members and community. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Joel Sr. had 3 daughters from a previous marriage, and they spoke to the court, describing their parents as larger than life. They shared that the couple was incredibly happy and loving, always putting their children first. One daughter expressed the profound love their parents had for all of them, saying, "They loved him so much. They loved all of us." In the wake of such a horrific crime, another daughter added that the family would never be the same, unable to fully comprehend or recover from the devastating loss and the tragic betrayal of their son. The pain and shock of losing both parents in such a brutal and senseless manner left an indelible mark on their lives. Moving on to the next case. Mildred Anthony. Mildred Anthony, a 78-year-old retired nurse, resided in Lake Worth, Florida, in 1985. She suffered from dementia. On the evening of April 27th, a passerby discovered her in critical condition, naked and covered in blood from severe blows to her head and face. Her clothing had been discarded and scattered nearby, while her dentures were found in the dirt. She was rushed to the hospital but tragically succumbed to her injuries a few days later. Investigators worked to piece together a timeline of events. They determined that Mildred was last seen at her home, where she lived with her younger sister, Gladys Nolan, in the 1300 block of Crestwood Boulevard in Lake Worth Beach. At some point, she wandered away, a behavior she had exhibited before. At 4:30 p.m., Mildred was reported missing. Then, at 10 p.m., a passerby discovered her lying on the ground along Old Town Indian Road in Jupiter, over 30 miles from her home. Witnesses recalled seeing Mildred enter a brown Oldsmobile sedan at the intersection of Dixie Highway and Lucerne Avenue. The man behind the wheel claimed to be her neighbor and assured them he was taking her home. However, what transpired between that moment and when she was found remains unknown. An autopsy later confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, with no suspects or strong leads, the case went cold for decades. That changed in recent years when investigators used genetic genealogy to analyze the suspect's DNA collected from Mildred's body in 1985. In March 2021, they identified the perpetrator as 61-year-old Richard Curtis Lang. He lives in Boynton Beach, Florida, which is very close to where Mildred lived. He is currently being held at Palm Beach County Jail without bond. He denies any involvement in the crime and hired a defense attorney. The attorney had this to say in a statement: Mr. Lang vehemently denies the allegations brought today by the Palm Beach County State's Attorney's Office, and we look forward to aggressively challenging the forensic evidence attributed to Mr. Lang. Nothing in Mr. Lang's past indicates a propensity for such abhorrent behavior. And given his age and health, we will argue that he should be released to home detention as we prepare for trial. It is unclear how Mildred's path may have crossed with Richard, who was 25 years old at the time the crime occurred. Richard, a convicted felon, had his DNA entered into Cody's following a 2012 arrest for weapons possession in Palm Beach County. Despite his denial of any involvement, investigators are confident in his guilt. He lived in the area, had a criminal history, and most notably, his DNA was found inside Mildred's body, an incriminating fact that is nearly impossible to explain away. Following the arrest, Mildred's son expressed his gratitude to the cold case investigators, stating, "It's been a long time, and I'm thankful to the cold case people for finding that dastardly SOB." He shared that his mother had worked with psychiatric patients at Little Rock Hospital in Arkansas. She had a passion for sewing, cooking, and cherished spending time with her family. Moving on to the next case. Suzanne Jovin. Born in West Germany on January 26, 1977, to parents who were both scientists, Suzanne Jovin was destined for success. Exceptionally intelligent, she navigated the rigorous German education system with determination and secured a place at one of the United States' most prestigious institutions, Yale University. Beyond her academic excellence, she possessed musical talent, singing in the freshman chorus and Bach Society Orchestra. Suzanne also dedicated her time to tutoring through the Yale Tutoring in Elementary Schools program, co-founded the German Club, and volunteered with a program that connected students with mentally disabled adults. On December 4, 1998, Suzanne submitted the penultimate draft of her senior essay at approximately 4:15 p.m. before heading to a pizza-making party at Trinity Lutheran Church for the volunteer program. After assisting with cleanup, she drove another volunteer home in the university's station wagon, which she had borrowed earlier that day. By 8:45 p.m., she returned the vehicle to its designated parking lot and walked the short distance back to her second-floor apartment. Around 8:50 p.m., friends passing by her residence invited her to the movies, but she declined. Just minutes later, at 9:02 p.m., Suzanne logged into her Yale email account. While conversing with a friend in German, Suzanne mentioned that she would leave some study materials in her apartment building's lobby once she retrieved them from an unidentified person. This individual has never been identified or come forward. At 9:10 p.m., she logged off her email, and shortly after, she left on foot for Yale's old campus to return the university's car keys. At 9:22 p.m., she encountered a classmate, Peter Stein, who was out for a walk. In a later interview with the Yale Daily News, Peter recalled that Suzanne did not mention any plans after returning the keys. Instead, she expressed how exhausted she was and looked forward to getting some rest. He also noted that she wasn't carrying a backpack but held multiple sheets of white A4 paper in her right hand. She walked at a normal pace, showing no signs of distress or excitement. Their conversation lasted about 2 to 3 minutes. It is believed that Suzanne returned the keys around 9:25 p.m., and she was last seen between 9:25 and 9:30 p.m. by another student who was heading home from a hockey game. It remains unclear whether Suzanne was heading straight home or waiting for someone when she was last seen. Roughly 25 minutes later, a passerby called emergency services to report a woman bleeding at the corner of Edge Hill Road, 1.9 miles from where Suzanne was last spotted alive. Police arrived within minutes and found the gravely injured student barely clinging to life. She had been viciously stabbed 17 times in the back of her head and neck, and her throat had been slit. The 21-year-old lay face down, her feet on the road and her body on the grassy strip between the sidewalk and the street. She was fully dressed, still wearing her watch and earrings, with a crumpled dollar bill in her pocket. Her wallet, however, remained at home. Suzanne was pronounced dead at the hospital at 10:26 p.m. During the autopsy, forensic experts discovered that a piece of the murder weapon had broken off, with the tip of the blade embedded in her skull. The rest of the knife was never found. According to ABC's 2020, a news show, the medical examiner claimed that only 1 out of the 17 wounds she had suffered was fatal. The knife is described as being 4 to 5 inches in length and made of carbon steel. DNA was found under Suzanne's left fingernails, and her fingerprints were found on a bottle of Fresca, which was located in the bushes in front of where her body was left. Also on the bottle was the palm prints of an unidentified person. Both of these details were kept out of the public until February 2001. The only store in the vicinity of the campus that sold Fresca at that time of night was Krause's Markets on York Street, 1 block south of Suzanne's flat. The store does maintain a surveillance camera system, but police never checked it, nor did they speak with workers who were on shift that night. It is unknown why they didn't follow up this lead. Witnesses came forward as the police began their extensive investigation into what happens to the young intelligent German American. Reportedly, a brown or tan van stopped in the road facing east, adjacent to where the body was found. This information was not made public until February 2001, and although a van was impounded this same year in connection to the murder, no link was ever established between it and the students. Another alleged sighting was of a man in his 20s or 30s described as having an athletic build, well-groomed hair, dark trousers, and a loose-fitting greenish jacket. He apparently ran from the scene like his life depended on it in the opposite direction from where Suzanne was murdered. This sighting was withheld for a decade as police wanted to show the witness an image of the student's thesis advisor to determine if they were who the witness had seen. He was not, and so they didn't contact her again. A sketch of the unidentified man was then released. While there were no witnesses to Suzanne's movement after the student spotted her whilst returning from hockey, it's assumed that she either entered a vehicle voluntarily or was forced inside, as the distance between where she was last seen and where she was found is too big a gap to be covered in such a small amount of time. After this, progress in Suzanne's case becomes slow and sporadic. In February 2009, Suzanne's parents wrote to the governor asking for forensic investigations to be properly carried out given how much techniques had advanced since 1998. In November that same year, results showed that the DNA beneath her fingernails was contaminated as it matched a technician at the Connecticut State's Police Forensics Lab. The main suspect in the case of Suzanne Jovin was her thesis advisor, James Di Van Velde, who was publicly named as such 4 days after the murder. It took 15 months for police to admit that they had no physical evidence tying him to the case, and it seemed that the only theory investigators had was that the student was carrying out an illicit affair with her teacher. However, her friends and boyfriend disagreed with this notion. Authorities then speculated that perhaps Suzanne was unhappy with her teacher given he had criticized her paper in some way, and this had caused some sort of rift between the two. They claimed that having Van de Velde as a person of interest was not a presumptuous one, but no real motive was ever given. Due to this reckless bull in a china shop approach, Van de Velde's career was nearly destroyed. His spring 1999 classes were cancelled, as his presence was deemed too much of a distraction, and his reputation suffered significant damage. In February 2001, after mounting pressure from multiple parties, Yale University hired a private investigative team. Their findings confirmed that no DNA or fingerprint evidence from Suzanne or the crime scene matched Van de Velde. In February 2012, a group of local residents informed the Jovin task force about a former Yale graduate who had died by suicide after expressing fears that he was about to be arrested for murder. Despite this, the task force chose not to pursue the lead. Suzanne Jovin's murder remains unsolved. It appears that authorities failed to conduct a thorough investigation, instead fixating on Van de Velde while disregarding other critical evidence. Now, more than 2 decades later, the chances of justice for Suzanne seem increasingly slim. Moving on to the next case. Valerie Tindle. A 17-year-old girl started a part-time job during her summer break, only to mysteriously vanish without a trace. For months, the police, along with many residents from her small town, searched tirelessly, but it seemed as though she had disappeared completely. Meanwhile, investigators were piecing together a complex puzzle of unusual and contradictory clues, until they eventually uncovered a startling revelation. Valerie Tindle was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana. She came from a large, close-knit family, including her parents, a brother, and 4 sisters. Eventually, they made the decision to leave the bustling city and move to a small town called Arlington, located about an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With only a few hundred residents, Arlington offered a quiet, peaceful, and safe environment. Valerie joined the local school, made new friends, and quickly grew fond of life in the small town. As a teenager, she began taking on different part-time jobs to earn her first paycheck. She started by working at local restaurants before securing a position with a lawn care company. This job was ideal for her. It offered a flexible schedule that worked well around her school hours, and operating a lawnmower didn't require much skill or heavy effort. By 2023, at 17 years old, Valerie was diligently working to maintain good grades with hopes of being accepted into college to pursue her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Her love for animals had been a part of her life since childhood, and becoming a vet had always been her aspiration. That summer, during her school break, Valerie was busy researching colleges and continued working as a landscaper to save as much money as possible before heading off to school. On June 7th, she told her parents she was heading to work, said goodbye, and left. Her mom expected her to return in a few hours, but as the day went on, it became apparent that something was wrong. Valerie wasn't answering her phone, and as evening approached, her mom decided to call her boss. Valerie worked for a neighbor and family friend named Patrick. To her shock, Patrick informed her that not only had Valerie not shown up for work, but she wasn't even scheduled to work that day. This revelation deepened her parents' concern. They began fearing something terrible had happened, but still held on to the hope that Valerie might be fine. Her mom even considered the possibility that Valerie had lied about going to work and spent the day with friends, though it was out of character for her. In the end, they decided to wait, hoping their daughter would return home soon. They also reached out to everyone Valerie knew, but no one had seen her that day. By the following morning, with no sign of Valerie, her parents decided it was time to call the police. After speaking with Valerie's parents, the police considered the possibility that she had gone somewhere secretly or even run away. Her mom mentioned that Valerie usually didn't work on Wednesdays, but assumed she had just picked up an extra shift that day. The officers then spoke to Valerie's boss, who confirmed that Valerie had no shift that day and had last worked on Tuesday. The police interviewed her friends and acquaintances, but none had seen or spent time with Valerie. Given the small size of the town, the officers quickly spoke to everyone who might have been with her, but it led to no new information. The only lead they found was a witness who saw Valerie driving by around noon on the day she went missing, but that didn't bring them any closer to understanding where she was. As days went by with no sign of Valerie, the police grew more and more certain that she wasn't going to return on her own. Investigators concentrated on 2 main theories: that Valerie had either run away or been the victim of foul play. Valerie's parents were doubtful that she had run away. There were no problems at home, and she had been working hard in school to achieve her dream of becoming a veterinarian. However, the possibility that she had run away still offered a small hope that she was alive and safe, as the alternative was much more terrifying. For weeks, the police, along with Valerie's family and volunteers, searched tirelessly around their town. Authorities also enlisted the help of local residents to locate Valerie's car. The fact that no one had seen her vehicle in the small town suggested that either Valerie had driven it out of Arlington herself, or someone had hidden it. Almost 3 weeks later, on June 26, the police finally discovered Valerie's car parked at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, about 20 miles from Arlington. The license plates were missing, and the doors were locked. There were no signs of a struggle or any useful clues inside the car, but detectives quickly uncovered an intriguing detail. The apartment complex where the car was found was a client of the lawn mowing company where Valerie worked. Despite this, Valerie's boss, Patrick, had insisted that she wasn't scheduled to work that day. The investigators began to suspect that he might be concealing something and started to focus more on him. After speaking with residents in the area around the apartment complex, they discovered another witness who had seen Valerie on the day she disappeared. However, she wasn't alone. Her boss, Patrick, was with her in the car. Upon hearing this, the detectives went to question Patrick. He initially stuck to his story, claiming that he hadn't seen Valerie that day. But when the police informed him that a witness had placed him with Valerie and that her car had been found, his story suddenly changed. Patrick admitted that he had indeed seen Valerie that day. In his revised version of events, Patrick stated that they met up in Shelbyville, where Valerie asked him to drive her to a small town called Homer, a few miles from Arlington. She allegedly told him she planned to run away from home and that someone would be waiting for her there. Once they arrived, Valerie got out of his car and into another vehicle driven by an unknown man, and they drove off together. Patrick added that the next day, he picked up Valerie's car and left it in the parking lot of the apartment complex where the police later found it. He claimed he was just trying to help her, but investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies in his story. They had already reviewed the location data from Valerie's phone, which showed that it had last been active in Arlington, not in any other town. This raised doubts about his version of events, and they confronted Patrick with this information. To their surprise, he changed his story again. This time, he said they had met near the apartment complex in Shelbyville, where Valerie got into his car and they drove to his house. He then left Valerie at his home alone while he went to work, and when he returned, she was gone. Naturally, the detectives found this version even less credible than his previous ones. They asked Patrick to hand over his phone, and he agreed. The detectives found text messages exchanged with Valerie on the day she disappeared. At 11:23 a.m., Valerie had sent him a message saying, "I'll be there soon." And a few hours later, Patrick had replied, "Where are you?" He sent the same message again little later, but there was no response. All of this raised serious suspicions, and the detectives were highly doubtful of Patrick's truthfulness. They decided to speak with Valerie's parents to ask if they had noticed anything unusual about Patrick's behavior. Valerie's mom shared that Patrick did sometimes act strangely. He had built a close friendship with Valerie, spending time with her outside of work, giving her gifts, and even taking her shopping. Sometimes, the 59-year-old man seemed to behave more like a jealous boyfriend than a boss. However, Valerie's mom didn't take these concerns too seriously. Patrick was a close family friend, and Valerie was friends with his daughter, so her mother assumed he was just being supportive. Yet, one particular incident stood out to her as especially suspicious. Patrick once invited Valerie to visit an aquarium in another city. Her parents allowed her to go, thinking that Patrick was taking his entire family. But they later found out that he went alone with Valerie, which her parents found quite odd. Valerie's mom also mentioned that on the night of June 7th, Patrick and his wife came over to visit their house, where he suggested that Valerie might have run away and might never come back. She also brought up one curious detail that caught the detective's attention. Patrick, why did he send her several messages asking where are you on the day she disappeared? After piecing together all the information, the detectives were nearly convinced of Patrick's involvement in Valerie's disappearance. However, with only circumstantial evidence and no clear idea of Valerie's current whereabouts, they couldn't yet hold him accountable. Still, the police decided to arrest Patrick for providing false statements, as he had broken the law by lying about not seeing Valerie on the day she vanished. He was formally charged, and the police continued to think what to do next. This move was largely driven by the detectives' hope that after his arrest, Patrick might eventually tell them the truth. But he continued to insist that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The next step was to obtain a warrant to search Patrick's home, but this process proved difficult. Without any solid evidence, it took several months. Eventually, the police uncovered another suspicious detail. Several of Patrick's neighbors reported that the day after Valerie disappeared, he dismantled and burned his garage in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. Finally, on October 11th, the police secured a warrant and went to search Patrick's property. His house sat on a vast piece of land with a pond in the middle. Four search dogs immediately indicated that there was a scent of human remains coming from the water, so investigators focused their search there. However, no remains were found in the water. The experts suggested that a body might have been near the pond at some point, causing the scent to seep into the water. The police then expanded their search across the property. They requested a helicopter equipped with ground-penetrating radar, and from the data collected, they created a map highlighting areas with some signs of digging. Given the size of the property, the search extended for several weeks. This continued until November 28th. When the police focused their attention on a large pile of construction debris mixed with soil. After clearing the debris, they uncovered 2 wooden crates beneath it. The first contained old VHS tapes and documents, though the police have not yet disclosed their contents. In the second crate, they found human remains wrapped in black garbage bags. The level of decomposition made it impossible to visually identify the person, but the detectives noticed the nails of the deceased were painted in the same color as Valerie's on the day she disappeared. The remains were sent to medical examiners, who quickly confirmed that they belonged to Valerie Tindle. Following this confirmation, Patrick was charged with her murder, and the detectives brought him in for questioning. Now that Valerie's body had been found on his property, Patrick did not deny his involvement. However, his account once again raised serious doubts. According to his account, they met that day near the apartment complex in Shelbyville for work, after which they went to his home, where his office was also located. Patrick claimed that Valerie began to blackmail him. He insisted that she had been trying to seduce him for some time and that, on that day, she demanded a new car. If he didn't comply, she threatened to tell everyone he had seduced her, destroying his life. Patrick said he panicked, and a heated argument ensued, escalating into a physical struggle. In the midst of this, he grabbed his belt and strangled Valerie. Afterward, he moved her body to his office and hid it there. The next day, he went to a store, purchased some wooden boards, and made 2 makeshift coffins. In one, he placed Valerie's body, and in the other, he stored documents and old videotapes. He also wrapped the body in garbage bags and duct tape to mask the odor of decomposition. Patrick then decided to hide the crates in a pit that was already on his property, but he needed something to cover them. So he used the construction debris, which was plenty on his land, and buried the coffins under a layer of soil to secure them. As for the burned garage, the purpose of his action remains unclear. Given that he burned it shortly after the murder and in the middle of the night, it likely has some connection to the crime. Perhaps he needed to destroy certain evidence, and the garage demolition was just a cover for the large fire. It's worth noting that the pit where he buried Valerie's body was only 100 yards from her parents' home, who had been searching for their daughter for almost 6 months. When police asked him how he felt after committing the murder, Patrick calmly stated that nothing in his life had really changed. Naturally, the detectives were skeptical of his entire story. It all seemed like Patrick was trying to portray himself as the victim, justifying his actions by claiming he was being blackmailed. A far more likely scenario was that Patrick had been ingratiating himself with Valerie for some time, hoping for a romantic relationship. On the day of the murder, he might have brought her to his home and attempted to initiate an intimate encounter. But when Valerie refused, he panicked at the thought she might tell her parents and decided to kill her. Another detail that cast doubt on Patrick's version of events was the testimony from Valerie's relatives. They mentioned that she loved her car and even said once that she wanted to drive it for the rest of her life. This made Patrick's story about being blackmailed for a new car seem even less believable. After charges were brought against Patrick, detectives uncovered several more intriguing pieces of evidence that further built the case against him. A thorough examination of his smartphone revealed that shortly after arriving home on the day of the murder, Patrick began deleting apps from his device. Although he failed to remove his health app, which recorded a significant spike in his heart rate for several minutes shortly after his arrival. Investigators believe that this was the moment when he killed Valerie and moved her body. Patrick also admitted to disposing of the license plates from Valerie's car and her keys by throwing them into a river, intending to make it harder for the police to locate the vehicle. He also revealed a chilling detail. After strangling Valerie with his belt, he just put it back on and continued wearing it as if nothing had happened. The victim's parents were devastated to learn that their neighbor and friend was her killer. They admitted that they had never truly believed Patrick was involved despite his strange behavior. It's important to note that detectives had kept most of the information from the parents to avoid compromising the investigation, so many details only came to light after Patrick's arrest. When Patrick was placed in jail awaiting trial and was appointed a lawyer, he didn't attempt to retract his confession, as is often the case. Instead, he and his lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Patrick would plead guilty to the murder, and in exchange, the charges of giving false information, for which he was originally arrested, would be dropped. Thanks to the plea deal, Patrick stood before the judge on March 11, 2024, just a few months after his arrest, and was sentenced to 57 years in prison. While this spared the victim's family from enduring years of waiting for the trial and dealing with the defense's attempts to justify Patrick's actions, the plea deal came with a significant downside. Typically, such agreements don't require the guilty party to fully disclose the details of their crime. Patrick only had to admit to the murder. As a result, Valerie's parents may never know the full truth behind the crime, even though investigators' theories seem the closest to the real explanation. Patrick's family was also horrified when the police discovered Valerie's body on their property. His wife and children, including his daughter who had been friends with Valerie, had unknowingly lived just yards from where her remains were buried for nearly 6 months. The plea deal also means that the content of the tapes Patrick buried in the second coffin alongside Valerie may never be revealed. These tapes might have contained crucial information or could have led to further charges, and Patrick may have feared that the police would eventually search his home after Valerie's disappearance. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.